All right, hello and welcome to the Coaching Conversation. This is your host, Salah Elithi. I am really delighted to have with me today Robin Atkins. I met Robin through work. We've worked together briefly, and I'm really happy that she was able to come on this podcast and share her experience and thoughts with me and whoever is listening and watching this. Robin, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. When you messaged me, I was so excited and said, absolutely, let's do this. So thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. I have been following some of your thoughts and posts on LinkedIn, and I recently came across this post that resonated with me, and I believe many who read it. Before we get started, I know when we met, you were working on your master's and eventually your PhD. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go back so people can understand like sort of the full journey of my complete picture a little bit. So it won't go too far back. I'm originally was a music director for middle school. So I taught middle school for about 7 years. And so I do have a master's in music education. So I understand that whole aspect. I was nationally certified and everything like that. So still play my violin. As you can see, there's violin in the background here. So I still play that very heavily. I'm involved in music boards and everything like that. So I still true to my fine arts background. When I went to work for the government, I eventually saw how things played out with leaders and how some things work in one group versus another. And I was interested, being an educator, I was very interested in learning about the theory behind leadership and learning in organizations. So I did. I went to George Washington University and got my master's in human behavior and organizational leadership and learning. So learning about all sorts of stuff about leaders and how leaders learn in organizations and how organizations learn or unlearn things. And then I shifted jobs, but then when I went to my new job, I wanted to pursue and continue that. So I refined my learning and I'm in the very last, like writing my last chapter of my dissertation right now, but I am getting my PhD in organizational psychology and it has working and going to school in the parallel and being able to see what my experience is plus the theories and everything that I've been learning has been very fascinating. So that's sort of my background.
Wow. It's really a blend of a lot of different areas, especially with music and organizational psychology and change and leadership. And I'm wondering, like, how did you decide that you wanted to pursue this master's leading into your PhD and the work that you're doing with organizations?
So it's hard to take my teaching brain off, my teaching hat that I had when I taught. So when I taught, I had a middle school orchestra program of about 300 kids. We traveled to Europe for tours and everything. Watching students grow is very rewarding and that kind of stuff. And when I went into the corporate space, I noticed that organizations tend to say, well, we gave you a training, so now you're good to go. You should be an expert at this thing that you've never been
Mm,
introduced to except for 4 hours in this training that you did. And I just found it unfortunate because that's not how humans learn or grow or do any of those things. And then it got me to think, well, maybe I should go learn more about how adults learn in organizations and what's human behavior like. And I do find there's a lot of parallels between how children learn, young
mm.
adults learn, and adults learn. It's really the same. It's just maybe a little bit they have more experience, different context. So I thought, well, let me go learn about the adult side of learning in and then they're in organization. So that's sort of why I was just curious pretty much. I watched an agile transformation be successful, and I watched another one fail, and they were weighted about the same. Not fail, but it took them a lot.
Mm.
One group took a lot longer, and I was like, what was it? And to me, it just boils down to the system that they function inside of, and that leaders have the power to change what that system looks like and allow people to be successful. So I was like, let me go study about that. That's sort of how I got
Yeah.
to that. Just curious.
Yeah, learning seems to be a big thing now. I mean, it's always been about, learning. I had similar experience when I started with this work in organizational learning and change. And one of the first thing that I came across was people at work usually feel like, okay, they've learned all there is to learn, and now it's just about work. But as you mentioned, it's really not just taking training and going back to the way that we do things. It's a change in how we do things, and that doesn't really happen just by sitting in the classroom for a day or two.
Right.
So, as you've been working with organizations and leaders and change, how has it been for organizations to adopt this sort of that learning is important, or it's something that they need to look at differently rather than just, oh, send some people to training, let them sit in a 2 day workshop, and then we're done. We can go back to work now.
I like to tell stories or like relate it to something that leaders do in their own life. So they do think a lot of times, I find, and it's just a bias that they have, I guess. They got training, so they should be good, right? There's three things that I do. I do music, I do martial arts, and I play golf. So I always find something that the other person can relate to and then use all the different kinds of learning and stories inside of that space and relate it to either golf. A lot of leaders in the big corporations do play golf. So it's kind of like saying, well, you want to improve your golf game or you're new to golf, you wouldn't just show up to a lesson, get a 4 hour or all day training on golf, and then expect to go score the way that Tiger Woods scores. Like
Mm,
that's an impossibility. Sort of in an organization, you're asking people to go learn a new skill. So if you're using the hierarchy of learning, you got to learn the basic knowledge, and then you got to learn how to apply it, and then you got to learn how it functions inside of your job, and then maybe you can have some higher level innovative ideas in that new with the new skill and using it in the skill. It's like I say in golf or even music. I still practice. I've been playing since fourth grade.
mm,
I play in an orchestra. I still find new things about the way, and somebody's like, well, you're a professional in that, so you're good to go. Like, not
yeah.
really. There's always learning to be had and ways to express that learning in your new situation. So I try to use stories with leaders. The other thing I try to do is get them to understand that as a leader, they build the ecosystem to allow the people to explore the new learning. The leader needs to listen. Maybe they need to change the order of a process that they have so that the learning can happen, or give grace. There's just all, I know there's all sorts of things to talk to a leader about, but
Mhm.
the idea of you got training, now you're good to go is not a good
Yeah.
idea on doing that.
That's the a good way to draw some sort of metaphors
Hmm.
or build on someone's experience.
Hmm.
I used to do martial arts when I was younger, and then recently I got back into it.
Hmm.
So it's very like trying to learn something that I've learned long time ago, but I've stopped. It's a process, and it takes a little longer to learn
Hmm.
now. But once you continue to practice, it comes back. You're an expert in this space and in terms of organizational psychology and how people learn. I hear a lot about this idea of neuroplasticity and how people can learn even a different time of their life. They still can are able to learn new things. Has that been a factor in terms of how leaders approach learning? Like, okay, this is going to be very hard for our company or our
Hmm.
workforce to learn because we need to invest more time or energy or resources, or has it been like, okay, well, we're committed to this, we want to do this, so let's go ahead and do that.
Well, first, I think it's easier when leadership's committed to the change or the new learning that has to happen. And it can't be, usually the conversation is, it can't be that you just point your finger and say HR needs to do that and I'll just sit
Hmm.
back. Like the leader has to have an invested, like actual investment, and they need to change and they need to look at the systems that they have in place. Going back to, it's kind of like, oh, you can't teach an old dog new tricks kind of mentality. Not necessarily the person's old, but maybe the organization has legacy, right? And it's really hard to change legacy,
Hmm.
including the people that function inside of that legacy. Again, I go back to, I don't believe that nothing that people can't change. I don't believe that you can't show new things.
Hmm.
I watch people that should I would have never guessed walk into our martial arts school, right? That have had many careers and now they're just older and they're like, I just want to be physically fit and get it. And then you watch them go through the different ranks and, they start out as a white belt and then eventually you're like, how did they become a black belt, over all these years? It's because they
Mm,
committed, they kept showing up every day. They kept at the practice, like you were saying. Same with music. I was humbled by, went to school traditionally, got classically trained. I'm a classical musician. And it wasn't until I went to a workshop, an all week workshop with people that I saw that there's just retired community of people that are like show up and they don't play like they play great for beginners, but I'm like,
mm,
I could never imagine being 60, 70 years old and walking in and being like, I always want to learn to play the violin. I know I'm 70, but I'm going to play the violin. And they play the violin and they're at it and they're at it and they don't
mm.
care. They go seek out experts, they go get the lessons, they do that. So the challenge as always, how do you recreate that in an organization, right? Like, how do you help after you get the training? The biggest gap I always see is the practice. Like, how do you help support the growth and practice of the new skill that you want? And that is definitely a conversation that I've had with leaders. Like, you're committed to this, but how do you support the practice? It's sort of like when I was learning to play the violin, my mom's like, you gotta block this time out for practice.
Mm.
How do you
Yeah.
allow for that? Because it's hours away from other things, but you do need to let them have that in their space.
I think that's the biggest challenge, like the allowing the time and the
Hmm.
space for practice, because especially in the work setting, usually we are doing things that we've always done. There's projects that are already continuing, and anytime there is someone learning new skill or taking time to practice something new, it's as if they're taking away time from the real work, quote
Hmm.
unquote. But again, there is using that dojo metaphor. You go
Hmm.
get into the dojo. There are things that you have to sort of repeatedly do and learn, and not just you're practicing skills, but at the same time you're applying these skills in
Yes,
in sort of
applying.
real scenarios.
Mhm.
So it's not like they take time and do training and then go back and just not practice what they learned. Then that's not gonna help them.
You made me think of something. I mean, the being able to go practice your skills and then you go into a fight, right? And then you're
Yeah.
like, oh, I really don't know. I don't really have these skills down yet. You
Right.
find out very fast. The other thing I was thinking about was maybe your opinion on there's like output practice and outcome practice. I do talk to my private students when I teach violin. It doesn't matter how long you practice, it doesn't matter how many times you practice. If all you're doing is saying, I'm going to play this passage 100 times, if you don't have purpose or you don't
Mm,
have an outcome driven idea about, like, when I play this passage, I want to make sure that it's musical through the top end of the phrase. If you're just playing it 100 times, you're not actually getting anything out of it, right? Like, so
yeah.
your outcome, or even if I'm playing, like when I'm at the driving range, I could hit 100 balls, but if I'm not consciously at every ball saying, okay, I want to try and do, whatever it is to get my ball to fly this way, and I just hit them, and then when I go actually play, I can't get strokes off my game. So,
Hmm.
that whole output versus outcomes is, I think, the way to capitalize on reducing the amount of time that somebody is just practicing at work is that we need, as a leader, to be very clear about why they need these skills and how do we help them drive to outcomes using those skills so that they practice them the correct way and in shorter amount of time.
I think that's it's interesting because I was thinking about this recently. I have an obsession with learning, and I'm sure, I mean, many of us have that sort
Mhm.
of learning. But then I realized that, why am I learning this thing? What's the purpose? And again, I don't think I'm the only one when I say that I jump into different courses or workshops or books even, and I don't really get to finish because again, like, I tend to find, okay, why am I learning this? What's the purpose? And without that purpose, like you said, the learning doesn't continue. Like, for example, like anyone in education or learning, people learn and then they have different levels. They go to the
Hmm.
next level. They earn some sort of degree or credential or certification. In martial arts, you level up to the next belt. So
Hmm.
there is sort of, I mean, that may not be the only purpose, but at least, there is some sort of kind of, it's like a game. Like the game, you level up, you keep at it because you want to get better and level up to the next, go to the next level and find it more challenging, more rewarding. But in organizations, it seems like this is not really the case. Learning has just happened because maybe a leader decide that, for example, we have now all the talk is about AI, everyone needs to be learning AI. But then the question, as you put it, like, what's the purpose? What are we going to, not that AI is not needed or
Right.
bad, but it's the same time, like, what's the goal of learning this? What are we trying to solve with this in an organizational context? And I've seen this, as you probably have seen with Agile as well. Like, let's do
Hmm.
Agile, let's become more Agile. And then, okay, what are we trying to solve? Or, like you said before we started this conversation, it's just a tool
Hmm.
to solve some problem or to do something. But if that's not known, then people just sort of, okay, they will learn it, but then they
Yeah.
won't apply it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned agile because we haven't really talked about agile here, but that's like the,
Mhm.
a lot of the work I find myself in. The I don't like leading with a framework, but I do like the premise of agile because it does allow for the growing and the learning, right? It
Hmm.
allows the space for the cycles to learn. So anyway, I just want to mention that. That's why, the iterative practice and the reflection and the retrospectives and just constantly continuous improvement and learning is interesting because all of the a lot of the books that I have on my shelf over here for textbooks and a lot of all the studies, when you go to school, you have to read all these studies and everything. I have in the margin a lot of times like agile, 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 agile. And the
Right.
book doesn't say agile, right? But like
Yeah.
so much of the theory supports that the core principles of agile is
Hmm.
actually very good. And so it's been interesting watching that come through pretty loudly through a lot of the education that I've gotten in human behavior and organizational psychology.
I think maybe that leads us to this question that I wanted to explore a little further. Like you've taught students in school, middle school, you mentioned, and then you've also been in organizations with adult learning. What have you seen to be like maybe similar or different as you helped both areas in this learning journey? Is there any like similarities or differences?
I would say there's more similarities than differences when you get to
Mm-hmm.
the core of it because everybody's brain is a human brain and so it just actually functions the same way and how it learns and develops and grows. I think with the younger students, there's a little bit more carefreeness to the learning and the space to make mistakes in in the educational system, just growing up through all of the different things and a lot more space for innovation and opportunity to explore in the classroom because it's set up that way. I think the biggest difference is in adult learning. It's even if it's labs or whatever, it just seems to be more clinical, right? Like you just here's a lecture, here's the notes, now you have the information. So that's the biggest difference. But when you break it down though, adults and children, it's a continuation of the human brain through all the years of growth and learning, right? So the hierarchy of learning is the same where you're learning you got to learn the vocabulary because if you don't even know the vocabulary, how do you even function inside of this new way of like with AI, right? Like what's all the AI vocabulary? So you could talk to somebody even if they know the vocabulary, but if they don't understand how it fits into the context and the deeper meaning of what that word really means beyond the definition, you actually can't have a higher level conversation with that person. Same thing with kids, right? Like it doesn't matter. It's vocabulary and then it's layering the advanced thinking skills to the point where you become an independent thinker on the topic.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say there's more similarities. I think it's how it's approached by the external forces that makes it different.
As you were saying, like the context or the environment,
Mhm.
and that's really something that resonated with me, your recent post on LinkedIn about the leadership confidence and
Hmm.
how the leaders may find themselves confident in one context but not confident in another
Yes.
context.
Yeah.
So very similar to this idea of like the students when they're in school, the context is they're learning, it's education, so they are free to make mistakes, they're free to try things. At work it's a different context, so we don't really want to make mistakes because that's not really encouraged, or maybe it's not psychologically safe in the environment, because we may feel or be perceived as incompetent, or
Hmm.
whatever the case may be. Say
Yep.
more about that
Sure.
context.
So the premise of that came because I was very deep in my analytical data for my PhD. And just so everyone knows, it's on East Asian American women. There's basically leadership self-efficacy of East Asian American women in senior leadership roles. So I interviewed a bunch of people in Asian American women and if East Asian, so Chinese, Japanese, Korean, basically, trying to understand how they overcame the barriers to being successful in their space. And I did start to see sort of this thread a little bit without saying what my results to my study is because it's not done. But I did start to see a thread of like all of them have strong leadership self-efficacy, basically the confidence that they could be a leader and that they
Mm,
could bring people along towards a goal. But it was interesting watching all because it's hours and hours and hours of interview transcripts that I've gone through and labeled and gotten patterns and themes. And it was interesting to kind of see that unfolding, which was it depended on the context that they were in. So if they were in a
mm,
situation where they were confident initially, they were kind of taught not to have that confidence and just I'll sit here and wait until you tell me what to do. It doesn't matter how many levels of confidence I have. Obviously, this environment I'm in is telling me not to speak up, not to do this thing. And then in other situations, they're able to just freely go off and do their genius and their amazing and be their amazing self. And so they have all the space to be confident. Because and then I think I don't remember if I wrote this in the article that I've eventually wrote from after my post was just basically as I see myself show up with lots of confidence in martial arts or in my music space, but I'm also paying to be in those spaces. And I wouldn't stay with an organization or a company, right? That basically didn't allow me to freely be myself. Now, when you're working, it's different. You're getting paid. You have other things going on. So I have in my whole career, if I look back, there are times where I was look like I was less confident, but it was more just because the organization basically told me my confidence wasn't welcome, and then other times where it was very much welcome, and I could lean on it. So that's
mm.
basically the where that came from when I was reading through a bunch of transcripts from my dissertation.
I see that when I work with leaders one on one as well. Like sometimes they're confident when they're, I mean, at home or like with their family, and obviously when they're at work, or it's a little different. And it's also maybe depending, like I've seen that even with teams sometime during, let's say, a retrospective, for example, when a team is reflecting on things that worked and things didn't work, but the dynamics and the confidence of how they bring these topics change when a leader or a manager is in the room. They tend to say things in a different way or be more guarded. So it's very much aligned with my experience and noticing the dynamics of how people behave differently when an authority or someone who's higher in rank is in the room. They tend to be not as confident in how they convey things. So that's very interesting in terms of the leaders need to watch for that, or be aware of that. So as you have done these studies, how do you bring about this conversation in a work setting, maybe, or even with the leadership in different companies? How do you start?
Well, with my coaching, I tend to like get to know the person so that I can
Mm,
understand. Because if I don't understand the frame of how they come to their decisions and stuff, so I get to know them really well. I can give you an example of there was a leader once, formerly in so I work in a lot of DoD spaces. So a lot of the people I work with are former military, and the way that you show up as a military leader versus coming into the civilian world is a little different
mm-hmm,
on how you can function as a leader. But I just remember like one time a a big meeting, and as a coach, you can't just jump in because then you have to do that in private, right? You don't say
mm,
anything, and so they did their thing, and we both knew that they did not show up the way they maybe should have, and caused a lot of problems, and got angry and said some things maybe that they should not have said. And I had my one-on-one with them later, and they were like, "So how'd you think it went?" And I was like, "I don't know. How'd you think it went?" And they said a bunch of stuff, and then I said, "I'm going to ask you a question." Because the person complained about all the things that other people did that caused a situation that happened, right? And I said, I'm going to ask you a question. When I ask you the question, if the first thing out of your mouth is to blame another group or another person, then that's not the right answer. Like, it cannot be
mm,
blaming another group. So my question to you is, how do you think you showed up as a leader yesterday? There was a lot of mouth opening but no words coming out, and then pausing because I'm making them think through their the thought process. Like, it's not, you can't blame the team. You can't, there's always two sides. It's not they did everything wrong and I did everything right. It's easy as a leader to say that they did all this stuff wrong. They should have, at the deadline, they should have done this, they should have done that. But as a leader, though, how do you think you showed up this past quarter? What did you do or not do that caused us to be in this situation? I hear all of the other, I agree with you on a lot of the reasons why, but for
mm.
you as a leader, how did you show up? And it was quiet. I felt like it was quiet forever. It's probably only quiet for about like 15 seconds, but it felt like forever. And then their answer was like, I didn't like how I showed up. I said, okay, well, so let's talk about how to fix that. What didn't you like about yourself of how you showed up as a leader this quarter, especially in that last meeting we were in? We went through a bunch of things, and
Mm.
yeah, so we put some stuff in place to make sure that that didn't happen again.
Yeah.
And he apologized to the entire organization, which was
Mm.
something that he had decided he wanted to do. And yeah, I think that the relationship with that leader and his people got better over time. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
sort of, don't blame others for your actions.
I see as a coach, and I agree with you. Like the first thing a leader should be responsible
Mhm.
for their action. They sort of set the environment or the
Mhm.
atmosphere of the organization or the team. And the other thing is like how they show up affect how people respond. So really, if the goal is to encourage the learning and the confidence and how people bring themselves to work and be able to improve in on how they work, then it starts with that kind of self-awareness and maybe coaching the conversations that you're having with leaders to be able to say, okay, how did you think you showed up as a leader? That's a great
Mhm.
question to
Mhm.
start become more aware of the things that the leader does in a work setting or in general as
Mhm.
a person. So I wanted to talk about like the any type of like you've been in this space for some time now, and you've gone through your master's and then a PhD is sort of you're in the final close to the finish line
Yeah.
here. What surprised you the most as you're going on this journey? Like Because there is the sort of the work that we know intuitively and just by experience, but then when you study and you find all this interviews and scientific research and theories, what was surprising? Was there any sort of surprising patterns that emerged throughout your studies?
I don't know if there's, I think it was more of confirmation
Mm,
on bringing, there's just something unsettling when I was in some of these agile transformations where people are just pushing the frameworks and pushing the frameworks. And internally, I just kept saying, I don't think that's right. Because
mm,
as a educator and a person that understands what I thought was human behavior. I mean, obviously, I just only had a master's degree in music education, but it's education, and
mm,
now I taught for 7 years. I had a huge private studio. Like I felt like I understood that aspect to it, and then when I went into the agile space and I became more focused in the IT world, I realized like they don't get the human side. Like I wouldn't say the
mm,
human side, period, but there's just a lack of understanding of you have tools and processes, and like, oh yeah, and there's people. Well, people aren't just to be, they're just not pawns in your little game that you have here. They
mm.
have feelings, there's expectations, they have to function inside of the tools and the processes. So when I started doing my deeper learning, I wouldn't say that anything surprised me other than that there was a lot more confirmation in that what I was seeing and feeling was wrong that I couldn't articulate. If anything, the education has helped give me the the words and the expertise in order to articulate what I'm seeing is maybe a misstep in organizations to being successful. I think that's probably the biggest surprise. I don't know if it's a surprise, but
Yeah.
it's just that I thought I
Well,
would
this,
discover something different, and it's like,
yeah.
no, my instincts for the most part were spot on, and now I have an education to back it up.
Yeah. Well, the surprise to me, or at least just because I kind of sense that this is aligned, like the research and the studies
Hmm.
and the theory all are aligned with how people learn and change. But the surprise to me is that we're still doing it the way that doesn't really work.
That is a surprise. Yes, that's
Because, everything research studies, people like yourself who spend years in getting their master's and PhD in organizational psychology, they're saying the same thing. They're saying,
Mhm.
okay, people don't change by just tools and processes. And at the same time, that's what we keep doing, pushing tools and processes. So
Yeah.
that's really the surprising thing. As have these conversations with leaders, how do you sort of connect the two worlds of here's what the research is saying and here's a more effective way to apply this learning and change?
I don't
Um,
know if, yeah, I don't know if I necessarily talk to them about that specifically and go academic on them.
mhm, mhm,
I think too many consultants, maybe not too many, but I find that when somebody wants to do a change, it's like quick, quick, and they don't do the analysis.
mm,
That's one big thing that I've learned from doing research is deeper analysis is kind of important. You can do it. You can do it not super fast, but you can do it. You should do it. But the analysis to understand their problem, because a lot of times you throw they'll get thrown a new process or a tool to say this will fix your problem when they didn't actually figure out what their problem was. It could just be that there needs to be some sort of learning or retooling of a one group of people and not the whole organization. So it's really more about conversations to say,
mm,
I'm more interested to understand what is your actual problem, and then saying who is the leader in charge that can make that change
mm,
happen. Because if we don't have a leader that's willing to help make that change happen and get behind it, that won't help. And then if we're solving the wrong, if we think we know what the problem is without doing any analysis or research or understanding it, at least asking a lot of questions, then you're just putting a band-aid on something that might not be broken, like
right.
you didn't get to the root cause. So that's typically what I do. I like to like really, what's your real problem? I don't want to throw a whole safe. I don't want to throw like a whole framework at somebody if that's not what their problem is.
I empathize with leaders because a lot of the pressure that they're under and
Mhm.
getting things quickly and a lot of the competition or new
Mhm.
technologies emerging and they want things to happen fast. And again, when we think of fast, like you said, like a a bandit or just something quick
Mhm.
so that we can keep going, that's where we end up in this sort of cycles of learning things that don't really help us solve the problem because first and foremost we don't really know what the problem is to begin with. So yeah, that's really important to reveal that what's happening in the organization.
Yeah, I think it's sort of the kind of back to your your tagline we talked about probably not recorded on this particular thing, but I just think that if you have speed without clarity, it doesn't actually create momentum. You're actually dragging the entire system down. So if you can go with
Mm.
speed, but if you don't have clarity on where you're going or why you're going there or what the actual problem is, you're not going to create the momentum. You actually, I think you there it's the drag. You end up dragging because there's a lot of churn. There's a lot of things going on.
And do you find that leaders in general understand sort of the psychology of the learning space of the individuals or the teams in the workplace, or
Mhm.
is it that they really mostly they want to focus on results? Again, like as a leader, they want results, they want
They
things
want
to happen,
results. Yeah.
but the thing is, like, how do you get the results? That's where some of these, oh, the what we talked about, like the patterns here, that can help.
So you can still, they want results all the time, period. Like they just want results. So if they come to you, like say if you're part of a learning and development, like say we're part of a learning and development group, and a leader comes to you and says, nobody on the sales team doesn't do this thing right. I want you to do a 4 day training on how to do sales, like whatever it is,
Mm,
and then go out and go do this thing. So now the L&D group is spinning up, figuring out, doing a 4 day training, doing all this stuff. And then when they get back, like they still, they implement the training, everything, and it's still no results. Like the result, like it's minimal improvement. Now, in a better situation, you would go and say, I hear that there's this problem. So let's go figure out what it is. And maybe it's like one process inside of their whole thing that this one group does that doesn't do a trade off, like a handoff correctly or something. I don't know. It could be just
mm,
anything. And it's more about training maybe that department versus the entire organization where you're spending hundreds of $1,000s on training an entire organization, putting people out for 4 days, that kind of stuff. So again, it's pause for a half a second and let us figure out what the actual problem is, and then go address the problem with with the group or the people that are or role that is causing the hiccup that you have, and then let's measure that. And if it improves, then you've done that. You've not wasted the entire organization's time. You've not wasted your time on never changing a behavior, because I think that it's all about it goes back to my teaching, I think. So the orchestra's playing something wrong, I just don't go say, go home and practice your part. Like I
mm.
have to actually diagnose why they're playing
Right.
that part wrong. And it could be
Mm,
because I didn't teach them the right, I don't know if you guys know, anyone listening know anything about music. Maybe I didn't teach them the right key signature and they don't actually know how to play the wrong note that's being played. So now I have to take the time for 15 minutes and explain to this group that this is the this is my diagnosed problem. This is the issue you guys have. Okay, now this is how you do it. So when you go home and actually practice it, they have the tools to be successful. Then when they come back, it might not be perfect, but it's better than it was the day before. And then we keep refining it. So I could just get mad at them over and over and over again and say, go home and practice, go home and practice, go home and
yeah.
practice. You guys aren't playing this right. But the diagnosis is so critical. And
Mm.
that's probably where my teaching stuff comes from.
I really love that, like the metaphor, the sort of the connection between music and work,
Mm-hmm.
because again, like the what I'm hearing is like sort of the listening skills. Like a lot of the musicians, they take that listening skills to the next level. So and so I really believe that leaders have, or people in general in the workplace or even society level, they need sort of to have that listening skills amplified so that they can, hear each other better. So I'm wondering if you have anything that you want to leave the audience or listeners with, or maybe a specific message to teams in general, or leaders, or anyone who's
I think the
watching this.
only I was like, ooh, I didn't know you were going to ask me this question. So, I
Yeah.
it's good. I think I want to go back to the people, process, and tools. I think we need to do a better job. Everybody just needs to do a better job at stepping back and looking at the people system, how people function inside of the processes and inside of the tools, and asking ourselves, is the system we have set up for them the right system to get the behavior that we want out of them? Because a lot of times the bad behaviors that you see are actually a result of a system that's set up incorrectly. So, from a industrial organizational psychology perspective, I do believe that you have to pay attention to the people system and
Mm.
not just the tools and the processes that your organization has, because that could actually be what's broken and why people act the way they do.
That's really important, and I want to dig deeper. And I know we're getting close to the end of the our conversation here. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your your
Thanks.
experience and wisdom here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.